Hello and welcome to TechByTosh. My name is Toshit and today we're going to look at SharePoint online site permissions in details, including the role of Microsoft 365 groups and SharePoint site groups in setting up the permissions. We're also going to look at the advanced permission settings, including permission levels, site sharing settings, and how you can create unique permissions within SharePoint Online. So let's go and have a look. Before we jump right into SharePoint Online site permissions, let's try to understand some basics first. So in this video, we're going to look at the type of sites in SharePoint Online. We'll briefly talk about the permission groups we have, and then we will look at team site permissions by creating a team site and what sort of different options we have. We're going to do the same for the communication site permissions by creating a communication site. And then the hub site permissions. We will briefly talk about hub site permission. So types of sites in SharePoint Online. Well, if you are watching this video, then obviously you must have some basic understanding of SharePoint structure and what sort of different sites we have in SharePoint Online. Let's briefly talk about different site templates or sites we have. So team sites are basically sites where you work with your colleagues and they basically use for internal collaboration. Communication sites are mostly used as intranet site or broadcasting news within the organization. And hub sites are basically connected sites. So those connected sites could be team sites or communication sites. The next is permission groups. So permission groups are basically groups which controls the SharePoint permissions. Now we have different sort of permission groups within SharePoint. Or I would rather say different set of groups which are used or can be used within SharePoint. So first of all, we have Microsoft 365 groups. Now Microsoft 365 group is basically a group which is based on a membership. And it actually works on a number of different services or applications within Microsoft 365. Say for example, if you are a member of Microsoft 365 group, now that group can give you access to a SharePoint site, to a planner, or MS Teams, or maybe to a shared mailbox. Although the SharePoint site groups are basically specific to the SharePoint site only. Now within SharePoint site groups, we have different sort of permissions level. You can customize those permission levels and create unique permission groups or SharePoint site groups. By default, when you create a SharePoint site, there are 3 site groups that get created. So the first one is site owners. So site owners have full control on the site. They can even delete the site. And then we have site members who have edit access to the site. So they can edit and modify any lists and document libraries, etc. And then we have site visitors. So site visitors, they only get read-only access to the site and they can also download documents. So now that you have some understanding about Microsoft 365 group and SharePoint site groups, let's talk about team sites permissions. We will be creating a team site in a moment, but it is important to understand what actually happens in the background. So whenever you create a team site in SharePoint Online, by default, it creates a Microsoft 365 group. So what that means is if you connect Microsoft Teams to that group or to the SharePoint site, you also get access to MS Teams. You can also create a planner or a shared mailbox and other services and have access to those services. One group can actually give you access to all of different services. So that's basically a membership-based service. Group owners and members of that 365 group basically have access to all those connected services which we just talked about. In addition to that, you do have an option to directly manage SharePoint site permissions using SharePoint site groups. What it means is, although it actually created Microsoft 365 group, you can actually add individual users or groups within the SharePoint site groups. You can actually add security groups, or if you have, created groups in your Azure AD or on-prem Active Directory, which is syncing to your Azure AD. So you can actually have or add all those, security groups within SharePoint groups so that you can manage your users in a single place. One exception to this is about the visitors. So by default, when you create a team site, it doesn't create any visitors. All it does, it actually creates group owners and members. And whoever is part of this 365 group basically has, edit or modify access or higher access. So there is no, read-only access within team sites, which is basically by default. But you can actually create SharePoint site groups or add, read-only visitors to your SharePoint site groups or to the site directly. So let's have a look by creating a theme site in SharePoint Online and what actually happens behind the scenes. If you want to learn more about creating a site and learn more about SharePoint, I have created another SharePoint Online tutorial and I've placed the link in the description below. Feel free to jump around and have a look at that video. It will give you more in-depth view of how you can create SharePoint sites and what different sort of options we have. For now, let's just go ahead and click on create site. So we're going to create a theme site. So I'm just going to click on the theme site and we'll need to provide a site name. So for this one, let's just name it TBT Sales, which is TechByTosh Sales. And we have our group email address and the site address. So I'm happy with the site address. Let's just don't worry about the site description for now. Now, this is something we need to be mindful of. Do we want to create a private site or do we want to create a public site? For now, let's have a look at the private site. So I'm happy with everything. Let's just go and click next. So in this section, I just need to provide the additional site owners. So, I'm happy with that. We're just looking at the site permissions. So let's just click finish. We now have our brand new SharePoint team site created. We won't worry about the designing the site. So we'll just close this window for now. Talking about permissions, we have created this site. Now let's have a look what actually happened in the background. So let me open Microsoft 365 Admin Center. Now within the Admin Center, I'm looking at the active teams and groups. Once I refresh the screen, I can see that it has actually created a group, which is TBT Sales and an email address. Now this group is not attached to any theme, so that's why we don't see this icon here. So if you click on the group, it opens up a group information panel for me. Now under that, I can see there's a basic information about the group itself. I can see who the group members are. So there's only owner. We haven't added any members. So it actually added me as a member itself. So this is the person who actually created the site. And under settings, we have different options, whether we want to allow external senders to this email group, which is this email group. Under Microsoft Teams, it's basically saying whether we want to create a team attached to this group. Under settings, you can see there is a private and public. So in this case, we have selected this site as a private site. So it has created a group, which is a private group. So I'm back on TBT Sales team site. Now let's click on the members. Now this is the group membership. So remember, we only had one owner. We didn't have any members. Let's try to add some members. So let's click on add members and we'll add Adrian as a member of the group. So let's just click save. So it has now created Adrian Shah as a member of this group or to this site. So if I click on this option, you can only see two options. One is member, one is owner. Remember, the groups doesn't have any visitor option. Let's close this window and go back to Microsoft 365 Admin Center. So once we go back to the center, let's click on TBT Sales Group again, which now opens up a window pane again. If I then click on the members group, you can see that previously I only had one member, which was the person who created the site. Now it has actually added Adrian Shah as a member as well. Remember, again, there is no visitors within the group. So I'm back to my SharePoint site now. Now let's have a look what else has happened for the site permission. Now to navigate to site permissions for this site, I'll go and click on the settings gear and click on site permissions. Once I do that, I get to see all the SharePoint site groups. These are the groups the site groups, the permission groups for this particular site. We already talked about those in our previous slides. Now, site owners, site members, and site visitors are the group, which are by default created when you create a theme site. If I open site owners group, you'll find that there is another group added within the SharePoint site group, which is basically a Microsoft 365 group, which we just looked at. And you can see TB and AS Adrian are basically two members of the site. If I click on the site members, you'll find that although it's TBT sales members, but it's basically the same Microsoft 365 group, which is being added to the site members, SharePoint site group. So under site visitors, you'll find there is no one added to this SharePoint site group. So right now, the permissions for this site is basically controlled by the Microsoft 365 group. We can directly add individuals or groups to the SharePoint site groups. Let's say, for example, we wanted to add someone as a visitor to the site, and we just want to assign read-only access to that person. Now to do that, we can simply click on add members, and we gotta choose from one of the two options. The first option is basically add members to group. So this one is basically telling us to add members to the Microsoft 365 group. Now, if we add members to the Microsoft 365 group, we will not going to have any visitors. So anyone we add within the Microsoft 365 group will have at least added or modified access. So let's just close this one and have a look at the other options. So click on the site permissions again, click on add members. So this time we choose share site only. You can read out the blurb. It basically says whenever we add any members through this option, we are basically adding those members or users to the particular site only. All those users added through this option will not have access to any of the group resources. If you have a group which is connected to a SharePoint site or a planner or calendars, any members or users which are added through this option will not have access to those resources. Basically, this is what we want. So let's just go ahead and add Peter Smith as a visitor to this site. So I'll just type Peter's name, click add, and it basically gives me an option saying, do I want to give edit access to Peter or read access or full control? Now remember, you do not get these options when you try to add any users to the Microsoft 365 group. The only options we get is if we want to add the user as a owner or member. But in this case, because we are adding a user directly to a site, we get to choose whether we want to give them edit access, read access, or full control. In our case, we just want to give read access to Peter. Just say read access. You can select this option and add a customized message, which will basically send an email to Peter. But in our case, let's just not do that and click add. So what has happened is if I open the site visitors group now, I can see Peter Smith is now added to this group and Peter now has read access. Again, remember, Peter only has read access to this particular SharePoint site. Peter will not have access to any of the group resources. If you want to give anyone access to site members groups, or basically you want to say you want to add members to this particular site and you don't want them to have access to any of the group shared resources, you can choose this option, basically add members, and go to share site and select whether you want to add them as members or give them full control or read-only access. So if, for example, if you choose Peter to have member-only access, you just choose edit, or if you want to make Peter an owner or basically give him the full control, you can choose full control. So there is another way of adding users to the SharePoint site groups. Obviously, there is add members. So, once you click on that, you get to choose whether you want to add the users to the Microsoft 365 group or to the SharePoint site only group. Let's have a look under advanced permission settings. Once we click on advanced permission settings, this is basically the option which only has SharePoint site groups. These are the same groups which were there in the previous screen. We have TBT sales owners, TBT sales members, and visitors. And then these are the permission levels assigned to each of the groups. If I open TBT sales visitors, we will find Peter is already a member of this group because we added Peter earlier. Let's have a look under TBT sales members. So sales members is basically, as we saw earlier, it actually had Microsoft 365 group in it. So this is the group. We can directly add any users or, any security groups or Azure AD groups to this SharePoint site group. So to do that, we can basically click on new and click on add users. So once we do that, we actually presented with the window, and I can just simply type on the name. I wanted to add Peter Smith, click on that name, and I can write any personal message if I wanted to write for the invitation. And when I click on options, so this gives me an option whether I want to send an email invitation to Peter or not. Once I click on shared with, this also tells me who else has access to this particular site. So Peter Smith already has access to the site because he's actually part of the visitors group. So let's just close this window. Let's say you have a security group created, or your organization manage all users through a security group, which could be a group in your Active Directory, which is syncs to Azure AD, or a group created in Azure Active Directory. So you can basically assign permissions to those groups as well. So if I search for TBT, I have all these groups created. So if I, TBT project visitors is basically a security group created within my Azure AD. So if I go back to the admin center and click on the security group, we should be able to find, yeah, there you go. So TBT project visitors is basically a security group that I created in our Azure AD. So going back to the site again, we have different options. So you can actually add groups or you can add individual users. So it depends on your requirements, depending upon how your organization manages users. So you have different options. Having those users managed through groups makes sense because you can actually reuse those groups and add these groups to different sites. If you wanted to give them permissions to different sites. Say, for example, within your organization, you're creating a site which is specific to a particular project, and you already have a group, which has all your project visitors. You can simply reuse that group and assign permissions to that SharePoint, site group. Now, again, because we are adding this group or individual users to TBT sales members group, which is a SharePoint site group, the permissions will be assigned based on the permission levels of these groups. So sales members groups has, members permissions, basically gives any users who are added to this group, they'll by default get any edit or modify access to documents and libraries and stuff. Although if you add any users or groups to owners SharePoint site group, then they will have full control on the site. So if you want to remove anyone from the group, you can simply select the person or the group and click on actions, and you can just say remove users from the group. So this will basically remove any selected users or any groups that you have selected. They will all be deleted from the TBT sales members group, which is SharePoint site group, and they won't have any access. But you need to make sure that if you want to remove these users from everywhere from the site, make sure to check all your SharePoint site groups as well. Click on the settings. So under settings, we have group settings. So which is basically the settings for this TBT sales members SharePoint group. Let's just click on that. So under group settings is basically all about the group. So you can specify the name and description of the group. You can specify what this group is all about. You can specify the group owners. So currently we have TBT sales owner as a group owner. You can specify some group settings, who can view the membership of the group and who can edit the membership, and whether you want to allow any requests from users to join or leave the group, and whether you want to auto accept requests and stuff. So let's just cancel out of that. If you remember, this is a private group, right? Say for example, you have a requirement and you want to add everyone from within your organization to have read-only access to the site. right? You can click on TBT sales visitors group, and under that you can add users to the group. Obviously you don't want to add individual users. Once you click on add users, so within SharePoint, whenever you create a site, it automatically creates a group called everyone, and there is another group which gets created, which is basically everyone except external users. So let's try to add everyone. So once we start typing everyone, you will see this drop down, which basically says everyone except external users. So this is basically is everyone within your organization except any external users. When we say external users, it's basically guests which are added within your tenancy. When we do that, so you can click share, or you don't want to send an email invitation to everyone. You can basically tick this off and share. Once you do that, then everyone will be added to the visitors group, and they will all have read access to the site. One of the difference between a public site and a private site is about everyone except external users group. So because we created this sales site as a private site, we didn't have this group added automatically. But if you create a public site, you will find that everyone except external users group is added automatically to your visitors group. Let's have a look at the permission levels. If you remember, sales owners were assigned full control, and visitors had read access, and members has, member access or edit access. So those are the different permission levels. Let's see what these actually mean and whether we can customize those, permission levels, and what sort of options we have. For that, we have to go to site permissions, because we are already within a group. So if I click on the settings here, I won't find the site permissions options. Now to do that, I can click on site contents. From there, I can click on the settings here again, and then go to site permissions. So if I click on the settings and site permissions, which will take me to this permissions page, and I click on advanced permission settings, which now opens up a new tab for me. So under that, I can see permission levels. So if I click on permission levels, so these are the different permission levels. So site owners were assigned full control, right? And then the site members were basically assigned contribute access, and site visitors had read access. These are the basic descriptions for these different permission levels. So if I click on one of those permission level, this is a full list of operations that this particular permission level can do. This is pretty much everything a site owner can do on a SharePoint site. So if I go back and look at the contribute permission level, for example, so you'll find, this is only a subset of permissions assigned to this contribute level. You can change these permission levels, but this is not advisable to change, the default permission levels. If you have any specific requirements, you can definitely create a new permission level. So let's just go back to the page again and try to create a new permission level. So let's just create a new permission level, click on add a permission level, and you can specify a permission. So let's say you want to give, edit access to members of the site, but you don't want them to delete anything. So let's just call it contribute and no delete, because we don't want them to delete. You can name whatever you want to this permission level, and you can write any description and stuff. So we can select, they can edit items, they can add items, but we don't want them to give any delete item permissions. And obviously these users can open items, and they can view different versions, but we don't want them to delete any versions. So these are the different sort of permissions that you can assign. And once you're happy with all the permissions, you can basically say create. So once this permission level is created, we can go back to permissions, which basically takes us back to the SharePoint site groups. Now, we have recently created that permission level and we want to create a new group now. We want to create a new group and assign that permission level so that we can add users to that group. Now we need to enter a group name. Let's just call TBD sales members, no delete, and we want to write something about the group itself. I'll skip this one now. So this is the group owner. So obviously, I am creating this group, so it's actually putting up my name automatically, but you do have an option to specify a group to be an owner of this. So, this is a sales site. So I'll basically say TBD sales owners is the owner of the group. So under group settings, who can view the membership of the group, I'll leave it to everyone because we are open. We want to limit the addition of the group membership to group owner itself. And we don't want anyone to leave or join the group because we want to limit that to the group owner. And these are the different permission levels. So this is the permission level which we recently created. So I will choose this one. So once I choose this one, this will basically apply this permission level, and any members or users added to this group won't be able to delete any of the items. So I'll just go ahead and click create, and this a new group will be created, and it has automatically added me part of the group, and I can then go ahead and add new users to this group. So I can add individual users. I just say Peter Smith, my favorite, and then if I wanted to add any group itself, so I can add the groups which are coming out from 365 or my Azure AD. So this is basically how you control access to your SharePoint site. You can actually create some custom groups, or you can use default groups which are created as part of your SharePoint site, and you can decide on permission levels. So the recommendation is to basically use default created groups when you create a site. Now let's have a look at the site sharing permissions. So let's go back to site settings and site permissions again. So let's just click on the settings gear again and click on site contents, and then we go to the settings gear again and site permissions. So click on that and then click on site permissions. We've talked about add members, and we talked about the default SharePoint site groups. So site sharing is an important section for permissions. So as the title says, change how members can share. So let's click on the link. So once we open the link, we can see different options. So these are the sharing options, how your site members can share your site and folders. So the first option is basically saying site owners and members can share files and folders and the site. People with edit permissions can share files and folders. Now, if you are a member of a group, you can actually share the whole site as well. The second option is basically limiting the site sharing to site owners only. And the third option is basically saying site owners are the only ones who can share files, folders, and the site itself. Now, based on your requirements, you have to choose one of these. So what basically happens is, if you choose the first option and your site members share a site, all those users who they share with are basically added to your members group. So in other words, site members are basically adding additional site members. If you want to prevent that, you can go for the second option, or if you want to go more restrictive, you can go for the third option. If you go for the first or second option, for example, let's talk about sharing files and folders. So currently, site owners, members can share files and folders. So whenever we share a folder within a site, whenever any member or user share a folder within a site, it actually creates unique permissions. Let me show you what it means. So let's just close this one. And I'll go back to, advanced permission settings page once again. I click on that, and I just wanted to show you how this looks now. So you can see this is plain simple. All the permissions are managed to the SharePoint groups. Now let's just go back to the site itself. We go to site contents and just close this window, click on documents. We don't have any folders. Let's just quickly create a new folder. Let's call it test. So we will name it test and just go create. And let's try to share this folder. So when I click on share, I share this folder. I would like to share this with my friend Peter, and I click Peter Smith and just say send. So I have now shared this folder with Peter. Let's just go back to the permissions page again and just reload this page. So what happened in the background is when I shared that page, it has actually created some unique permissions. So when I click on show these items, I get a message which basically tells me some content on this site has different permissions from what you see here. All right, let's just click on show these items, and it will tell us that this list, basically a document library, has some unique permissions. If I click on manage permissions, it's basically telling me about this document has some unique permissions. I didn't have this option before, so I get that option as well. So I have an option to delete unique permissions, but what this will do is it will delete the sharing that the folder that I shared. It will delete those permissions with Peter. You can do that, or you can leave it as it is. But this is how SharePoint works. So whenever any member or owner share a site or a folder, particularly files and folder, it actually creates unique permissions. So if I click on to show these items again, so remember previously when I clicked on in, it actually showed me the document library itself. Now it's showing me the folder itself. Let's just click on manage permissions. So once I click on manage permission, it shows me what are those unique permissions. It's actually now showing me that Peter Smith has a permission on this folder through a sharing link. I can delete the unique permissions. So once, let's say I want to delete these unique permissions. If I click on that, click OK. So it will basically delete all unique permissions from this site. And I can just say manage parent, which is basically saying whatever permissions I have set up on that site, just inherit those permissions. Now coming back to the site sharing settings again, let's talk about the access requests. So we have an option to allow access requests for this site. If you have it turned on, what happens is whenever someone tries to access this site, and if that person doesn't have access to the site, they will basically get a message saying they would like to request access to the site. And that sends an email to the specified email, which you can specify here, or to the group that we have selected, which is in case is our TBD sales owner group. We can also write any custom message which will be displayed on the request access page. So this way we can actually open up the site and be less restrictive, because if someone tries to have access to the site, they can basically browse to the page and they're not getting blocked. They can request access to the site and someone will take action on those requests. So in this case, the request will come to TBT sales owners. So whoever the owners are, they will get an email notification and they basically can click on the link and approve or deny the request. We looked at SharePoint site permissions. Now what if you want to assign some unique permissions to your document libraries or to the lists in SharePoint? To do that, you can simply click on the document library itself. and then click on settings gear and then library settings. Once you do that, then under permission and management, click on permissions for this document library. Now this opens up a site permissions page, which basically saying that this document library is inheriting permissions from its parent, which is TBT sales, which is the site we are in. If you want to assign unique permissions to this document library, then you have to break the inheritance. You can click on stop inheriting permissions and click OK. Right now, we are not inheriting permissions from the parent. It says delete unique permissions, which means this library has unique permissions. Now, I don't want any visitors to this site. The visitors can have read-only access to the whole site, but I want to keep this document library private. I don't want this to show to any of the visitors, or maybe to this group which has no delete access. So I select these two and I click remove user permissions. So once I do that, it basically removed those permissions from this document library only, not from the site. So let's just go and check what actually happened to the site. So this is the document library. Let me open another tab. So we'll just copy that and open another tab, and let's just say this is our site, and we click on the settings gear again, site permissions, and click on advanced permission settings. So once we go to the page, we can see all the groups are still there. But it actually tells me that some content on this site has different permissions from what you see here. So these are the site level permissions, but because we have broken the inheritance on a document library site, it is now telling me that something has different permissions on the site. I can click on this to show those items, which again tells me it's the documents. I can click on manage permissions again, and it now shows me that this document library only has two permissions group, which is fine because this is what we wanted. So this is how you can actually control unique permissions or create unique permissions within SharePoint Online for a document library or for a list, or maybe for a calendar. It's up to you how you want to manage and structure site permissions in SharePoint and how you want to structure your document libraries. So we looked at site permissions for team sites. Let's have a look site permissions for communication sites. So let's go and create a communication site. Again, if you want to know how to create a site and what different options and want to learn more about SharePoint, you can click on the link which is given in the description below to learn more about SharePoint. And I've already created a SharePoint tutorial which is already published in YouTube. So let's just go ahead and click on communication site and give it a name. So this time let's just call it TBT, just say demo site. So happy with the site name, site address. So we didn't get any shared mailbox this time, if you've noticed, and we don't basically get any other options. So let's just go and click finish. It will create a site. Not sure if you have noticed, but we didn't get any option to select any additional site owners when we created the theme site template. So we're not here to browse, different templates. Let's just close this window. And you might find that there is no Microsoft 365 group displayed on this page. And if we go back to Microsoft 365 Admin Center and let's just try to refresh this page, there won't be any Microsoft 365 groups created when we create a communication site in SharePoint Online. So as you can see that there is no demo group created. So this is Microsoft 365, and obviously these are the security groups. Again, there is no demo group created. So what it means is whenever we create a communication site in SharePoint Online, it doesn't create any Microsoft 365 groups. All the permissions are managed through SharePoint site groups. Now, talking about SharePoint site groups, it's basically the same options and features which we looked at for the team sites. So let's go and click on the settings gear and click on site permissions. So under site permissions, you will find there are site owners, site members, and site visitors group. If I open one of these, you can see there is my name, which is the person who actually created this site, and there is no group. So there is basically an individual added to this site owners group. Under site members as well, there is no one. Under site visitors, there is no one. So if I go and click on advanced permission settings, which is again exactly same as the team site, and click on the demo site owners, you will find that there's only individual added. There is no group added because it does not create any Microsoft 365 groups. You can definitely add new members or groups to this SharePoint site group. So to do that, you can click new, and obviously it opens up a window, and let's just search for one of the groups. So you can see it actually has a lot of groups, and I can even add TBD sales members to this demo site owners or visitors or members. So in a nutshell, all the SharePoint site permissions for communication sites are basically purely managed through SharePoint site groups. So let's just go back to the site permissions page again. So click on settings and site contents, and we click again on the settings gear. Let's just close this window, click on settings, and we go to site permissions. Now, site sharing settings, again, these are the same options which we looked at for the team sites, and same for the access requests. The only difference here is basically the sharing option for the site. Now, we didn't have the share site option in team site. So if you have added or selected, the first option where the site members and people with edit permissions can share files in folder and members can share a site, then that's a problem. That is something you need to keep an eye for. Let me show you what it means. Let's just close this window and let's share a site. Before we do that, let's just say, there are no site members, there are no site visitors. So let's just share a site, and I want to share this site with my friend Peter again. Select Peter, and this time we want to give him edit access. Let's not send an email, click add. So what happened in the background is it actually added Peter under site members group. So what it means is if you have number of users added under site members, and as a site owner you have basically limited and those users, and you want to control this group, these members can basically add other members by sharing a site. These members wouldn't even know that they actually added someone to the site members group, and those users have edit or modified access to the whole site, or whatever permission levels you have assigned to site members group. Now this could be a problem if you have a private site and you have some sensitive documents within the site which you don't want to share with others. Obviously, some of your members can share with other members who are, have signed NDAs or, who they trust. But again, sharing a site can actually give someone access to all the document libraries within the site. So as a site owner, you might want to have a look at this option, and you might want to select this option carefully depending on your requirements. Now coming back to hub sites. So hub sites are basically sites which are connected to different sites. Those sites could be communication sites or team sites. So depending upon, which sites these hub sites are connected to, you have different options to manage site permissions. Obviously hub sites provide, shared and consistent navigation, but site permissions are managed through the sites. And we have looked at how you can manage team site permissions in SharePoint and communication site permissions in SharePoint. So I guess you have a pretty good understanding of how the hub sites would actually work and the permissions would work on those ones. So we learned about how you can create unique permissions in SharePoint Online and the role of Microsoft 365 groups, and how you can create different sort of permission levels in SharePoint. I hope you really enjoyed the video. Please don't forget to leave your comments and hit like and subscribe to see more videos like this in future. That's it for today. I hope to see you next time.